Have you ever felt like the one person everyone else could always depend on until the moment you needed someone yourself? Maybe your story, like mine, began with small requests. Can you help with the groceries this week? Do you mind watching the house while we're away? Each time you said yes, believing that's what family does. But somewhere along the line, those little favors blurred into something bigger, something invisible, yet impossibly heavy. My name is Madison Greene, and for most of my adult life, I was the silent backbone of my family, the fixer, the rescuer, the one who never seemed to need saving. It's easy to believe that love is measured by sacrifice, especially when you're raised to put everyone else first. In my family, I learned early that being the strong one meant swallowing my own needs so others could feel safe. When the furnace broke in the dead of winter, I wired the money before they even asked. When my dad lost his job, I paid the mortgage, no questions, no conditions. When my little brother Carter needed a new start after another failed dream, I gave him the keys to my apartment and my trust, even when it cost me peace of mind. Still, every holiday, every reunion, there was always an empty seat mine. No matter how many ladders I climbed in my career or how many times I showed up when it mattered, there was always a reason I was left off the guest list. The house is too full this year, Madison. Maybe next time. Or a group photo sent to my phone with the message, "Wish you were here." For years I told myself it didn't matter, that being needed was its own reward, but deep down a question always lingered. When would it be my turn to feel like I truly belonged? Maybe you felt that too. The ache of being overlooked, the sting of silence when what you really needed was a simple thank you. If you have, you're not alone. Today I want to take you on a journey through the years I spent in the shadows of my own family. The turning point that changed everything, and the messy, beautiful work of reclaiming my worth. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't just holding everyone together. Sometimes it's choosing yourself. So if you've ever wondered whether your story could change, whether the outsider can ever become the author of her own life, stay with me. You might just discover that even in the quietest corners, there's a voice waiting to be heard and a home waiting to be reclaimed. From the outside, the Greene family looked like the kind of clan you might see on the cover of a holiday card. There was the weathered family beach house on the rocky shores of Maine, its porch painted a hopeful blue and wind chimes, always tinkling in the salty breeze. Every summer the Greenes gathered for a reunion, children darting across the sand, adults laughing over seafood boils, the air alive with stories that seemed to grow taller each year. And yet, for as long as I can remember, my place in these pictures was always a little blurred, as if someone had set the camera just out of focus whenever it was my turn to smile. I was the oldest daughter, but never the golden child. That honor belonged to Carter with his easy charm and steady confidence, or to Sophie, whose laughter filled rooms and whose hugs could soften even the sharpest edges of family tension. My role was different, quieter, a background note in a symphony that played without missing a beat. It's funny looking back how the patterns of childhood can echo into adulthood. As a kid, I was the helper, the one who made sure everyone's marshmallow roasted evenly, who remembered to pack extra towels, who brushed sand from the porch steps before anyone else woke up. At first, I thought that was just being responsible, the kind of person my parents could count on. But somewhere along the way, it became something else. I started to notice how at every family event, I was the one behind the scenes while Carter and Sophie took center stage. When Carter won a local debate or Sophie starred in the school play, the whole family celebrated with banners and cake. When I quietly brought home straight A's or won a state science competition, it was more of a brief. "That's nice, honey," before talk turned to someone else. These moments weren't big explosions of neglect, they were tiny, almost invisible. But over time, they built up layer by layer until the message was clear. My job was to support, not to shine. I wish I could say that, as I got older, I simply brushed off this role. But the truth is, it became so deeply woven into my sense of self that I carried it everywhere: school, college, even into my first job in Chicago. I became the one who stayed late to help others finish their work, who always volunteered for the unglamorous tasks, who believed that being indispensable was the next best thing to being chosen. And like so many who fall into this pattern, I found that the more I gave, the less visible I became. It's a strange paradox. Sometimes the people who keep everything running are the first to be forgotten. I once read about the invisible child phenomenon in American families, a term psychologists use for the sibling who always follows the rules, avoids drama, and quietly keeps the peace. They're praised for being low maintenance, but the cost is high. Often these children grow up to become adults who believe their value depends on how useful they are to others, not on who they are inside. If you've ever felt like this, you're far from alone. I remember once at a friend's Thanksgiving dinner, I watched her mother gush over her brother's new job, then ask her for help setting the table without so much as a, "How was your year?" My friend smiled and shrugged it off, but later that night she admitted it always stung. "It's like I'm only here to make things easier for everyone else," she confessed. In that moment, I saw a reflection of my own experience, how easy it is to become the family's foundation without ever feeling like part of its heart. I think deep down, so many of us carry a similar ache, the hope that maybe just once, someone will notice our quiet efforts and say, "You matter. You always have." Looking back, I wish someone had told me that being the invisible one isn't a life sentence. The first step to changing any story is to see it for what it is, to recognize the patterns, and ask where they came from. In my case, it wasn't that my family didn't love me, they just got used to me always being there, always fixing, always holding things together. In the absence of crisis or drama, I became the steady hand everyone relied on, but no one thought to ask if I needed help myself. It took me years to realize that invisibility is often a side effect of consistency. People stop seeing the person and only see the role. The real challenge is finding the courage to step out from behind that role and ask, "What do I need? Who am I if not the fixer?" That realization was the seed of everything that came after. For a long time, I thought if I just achieved more, another degree, another promotion, another act of service, my family would see me differently. But the truth is, no amount of sacrifice can fill the space where self-worth should be. The lesson I learned slowly and sometimes painfully is that you can't control how others see you, but you can choose to see yourself more clearly. And that's where change begins, not with resentment or anger, but with the simple act of believing you are worthy of more than what you've been given. As I got older, my life in Chicago grew busier and more successful. I moved into a sunlit apartment, earned recognition at work, and built a circle of friends who cheered for me in ways my family never quite had. But every time summer rolled around and the invitations to Maine grew vague or disappeared, a part of me still ached. I wondered if anything I did would ever be enough to earn my place at the family table. That question lingered at the edges of every success, every new milestone, until the year it all changed. That year, an email arrived that would set off a chain of events I never could have imagined. And for the first time, I realized my story didn't have to end with being left out. It could begin with choosing myself. There's something almost magical about the way we chase approval, even when we know it's always just out of reach. Growing up, I believed that if I worked a little harder, smiled a little wider, or carried a little more, the moment would come when my family would finally turn and say, "We see you, Madison." I threw myself into academics, obsessed over perfect grades, and built a resume that sparkled like the lights of downtown Chicago. When I landed my first internship at a major tech company, I called home breathless with excitement. "That's great, honey," my mom said, distracted. "But did you remember to send your brother a card for his birthday?" The words landed softly, but their weight settled into me all the same. I wanted to believe I mattered not just for what I could do, but for who I was. At work, things were different. I learned early on that effort was rewarded, that late nights and well-written reports meant recognition and raises. My manager, Carla, noticed the way I went the extra mile, and she made a habit of telling me, "You're the glue here, Madison." Her words warmed me in a way I didn't know I needed. Still, there was a curious emptiness whenever I walked into a family gathering. My accomplishments, so hard-won and celebrated in the office, shrank to shadows in the glow of my siblings' stories. Carter, with his new law partnership, always had the family's rapt attention. Sophie's updates about her growing boys drew laughter and coos. My updates, if asked for, were squeezed into the space between refilling wine glasses or clearing plates. It was as if my life happened somewhere far away in a place they could never quite picture, and so it didn't really count. I used to think this was a problem unique to me. But over the years, I found I wasn't alone. One night after a work conference, a colleague named Erin joined me for dinner and admitted my mom still sends me articles about getting a real job, even though I lead my department. We laughed, but it was the laughter that comes from shared wounds. Later, I read an essay by Michelle Obama where she described her own struggles to balance external achievements with internal belonging, how even as First Lady she sometimes wondered if she was enough. It struck me how universal this need for approval is, and how often it lingers, haunting even the most outwardly confident people. Why do we measure ourselves through the eyes of others, especially those closest to us? Psychologists say it's part of our wiring. Family is our first mirror, the place we first look to see who we might become. When that mirror reflects back only our usefulness, not our uniqueness, the longing for acknowledgement can turn into a lifelong quest. We become experts at earning gold stars, hoping they'll fill the gaps that words and hugs never quite did. But in doing so, we risk losing sight of what we actually want, or worse, who we actually are. Sometimes chasing approval becomes a habit, so ingrained we stop noticing the toll it takes, miss chances to wrest relationships. We let slip away or joy sacrificed for another checkmark on a list no one else can see. One spring, after a particularly long project launch at work, Carla invited me to her home for a family dinner. Her parents asked about my life with genuine curiosity, leaning in listening. Afterward, as we washed dishes, I found myself sharing details about my job and my favorite places in Chicago, stories I rarely got to tell. Carla's mother patted my hand and said, "You seem like someone who's always looking out for everyone else. Just don't forget to look out for yourself, too." I smiled politely, but that night her words replayed in my mind. I realized I had spent so long trying to be essential that I'd forgotten how to simply be present for myself. That dinner marked a quiet turning point. I started to notice all the ways I'd tried to buy my way into belonging, organizing elaborate family gifts, booking vacation rentals, smoothing over arguments, taking the late flight so someone else could have the early one. Each act of service was another audition for a role I was never quite cast in. The lesson, though, was simple, and it took years to fully understand belonging isn't something you earn by effort. It's something you build by being your honest self, even when that means risking being overlooked. When we stop measuring our worth by the approval of others, we make room for a deeper kind of fulfillment, one that comes from knowing without question that we are enough. Still, change doesn't happen overnight. I wish I could say that realization fixed everything, that I stopped caring about family approval just because I understood where my ache came from. The truth is, old habits run deep, but a seed was planted. Maybe my worth didn't depend on their recognition. Maybe it was time to look for a new kind of acceptance, the kind that starts from within. As the seasons changed, so did my resolve. I started saying no just once in a while. I carved out time for friendships that made me feel seen, and I began to wonder if I could build a life that fulfilled me. Could I also find the courage to change my story with my family? That question lingered at the edges of my days, especially as another family summer reunion drew near. One morning, I opened my email to find a familiar subject line: Greene Family Reunion, save the date. But as I read the message, my heart sank. Once again, my name was missing from the list. This time, though, something inside me shifted. I realized the cycle could only continue if I allowed it. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to draw a line and imagine a different ending. There's a moment that comes for many of us, a single message, a phone call, or a comment that draws a bright, undeniable line through what came before and what comes after. For me, it was an ordinary morning in early May, the sun angling through my kitchen window and the smell of coffee filling the air. I'd woken up with a rare sense of hope, imagining that maybe this would be the year things changed, the year I'd finally be included. But when I checked my phone, the familiar ache returned. There it was, an email from my mother, cheerful subject line and all. Greene Family Reunion, save the date. I clicked, scanning for details, heart beating faster than I'd like to admit. My eyes caught on the list of attendees Carter and his wife Sophie and her boys, even distant cousins who lived 3 states away. But not me. There was no explanation, no apology, just an implicit assumption that I wouldn't be there. I stared at the message, the words blurring, and felt the old sting behind my eyes. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they thought I was too busy or that I wouldn't want to come. But the truth was plain as day. I'd become an afterthought in my own family's story. For a few minutes, I just sat there holding the phone, memories washing over me, missed graduations, birthdays, celebrated without me holidays spent working late, not because I had to, but because it hurt less than being left out. I remembered a study I once read about family estrangement in America, how common it's become for adult children and parents or siblings to grow distant sometimes, for reasons no one can really name. The article said it's not always about anger or drama. Sometimes it's just silence slowly widening until you don't recognize the people you once loved most. Needing someone to talk to, I dialed my friend Layla, whose voice has always been my shelter in a storm. She listened without interrupting, then asked gently, "What if you stopped waiting for their invitation? What if you wrote your own?" Her words landed with the force of something I'd needed to hear for a long time. It made me think about all the ways we're trained to wait. Wait for permission, for acceptance, for someone else to say we belong. It's a pattern that shows up everywhere, not just in families. I once had a colleague, Greg, who spent years quietly doing stellar work, but never put himself forward for a promotion, always waiting for someone to notice. By the time he realized he could ask, the opportunity had passed. "Don't wait for someone to hand you your place," Layla said. "Sometimes you have to claim it." That conversation was a turning point, however subtle. For the first time, I considered that I had a say in my own story. Maybe the invitation I was waiting for would never come. Maybe the only way to change the pattern was to stop playing the same old role. It was both terrifying and freeing to realize that. I spent a few days thinking deeply about what I wanted, not just from my family, but for myself. I wanted to feel valued, of course, but more than that, I wanted to feel whole, regardless of anyone else's approval. I started journaling about moments that had brought me real joy, the satisfaction of finishing a tough project at work, the laughter with friends on a Friday night, the peace of a quiet morning run along the lake. I began to wonder what would happen if I built more of my life around those moments instead of constantly measuring my worth against invitations that never arrived. The lesson I realized was about agency. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of family dynamics that seem set in stone, but every choice is a small act of authorship. We can choose how we respond, what we believe about ourselves, and what boundaries we set. For me, that meant deciding not to let another summer slip by in silence. If my family couldn't make space for me, I could make space for myself by building new traditions, investing in friendships, or simply choosing to show up for myself in ways no one else ever had. As spring gave way to the soft promise of summer, a new determination began to grow. I wasn't sure what the next steps would look like or how my family would respond if I spoke up, but I did know this change never happens by accident. It begins with a single, sometimes painful act of courage, the willingness to see things as they are and to imagine how they could be different. With that in mind, I started to pay closer attention to the things happening beneath the surface. And that's when I stumbled across something that would change everything: a secret about the Greene family beach house, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice. The Greene family beach house had always been more than just a building. Perched on a weathered stretch of Maine coastline, its white shutters and wraparound porch held generations of stories. Late-night card games, whispered secrets on the sand, and the quiet comfort of belonging, at least for everyone else. To me, it was a place of contrasts, nostalgia, woven with longing beauty threaded through the ache of exclusion. It's funny how a house can mean so many things to different people, how a single door can open onto 100 separate memories. I hadn't planned on uncovering any family secrets. It started with a stray piece of mail, one of those accidental forwards in the family group thread that no one noticed except me. The email was addressed to my father from a bank I didn't recognize its subject line: ominous, urgent, delinquent account notice. At first I thought it must be spam, but the address, the reference number, even the closing signature were real. I felt a prickle of unease and clicked through. As I read, my heart sank. The house our family's pride and tradition was in trouble. Missed mortgage payments, late property taxes, and a looming threat of foreclosure. Suddenly, the summer reunions, the careful maintenance, even the reluctance to invite one more, all made a new kind of sense. It's a strange feeling to discover that what you always thought was solid is in fact fragile. For a moment I was angry. Why hadn't anyone told me? Why had my parents and siblings tried to keep up appearances rather than asking for help? But beneath the anger was something else: understanding. I remembered reading about families across America who quietly face financial difficulties, keeping secrets even from those they love most. There's a peculiar shame in struggling, especially when a home holds so much symbolic weight. I thought of my friend Alan, whose family nearly lost their house after his father lost his job. Alan told me we kept up the holiday lights and the Sunday dinners, even as we sold furniture behind closed doors. It's the American way: project strength, hide weakness, hope no one sees the cracks. That discovery shifted something in me. For years, I'd wanted my family to see me, to let me in. Now I realized they were holding on so tightly to tradition and pride that they couldn't ask for help, even from someone who would have given anything to be included. Suddenly, my longing for belonging and their struggle to preserve the family legacy felt intertwined, two halves of the same ache. It made me see my parents and siblings differently, not as people intentionally excluding me, but as people desperately trying to protect what little sense of stability they had left. This revelation forced me to ask hard questions. What does it mean to keep a family together? Is it about appearances, rituals, or something deeper? If a home is on the brink of being lost, is it worth saving for the memories? Or does clinging to it only prolong the pain? I wondered if my family, like so many others, had confused the physical place with the emotional ties that truly matter. I realized that for years, I had done something similar, pouring myself into achievements and acts of service, hoping to preserve some sense of connection, even as the foundations crumbled beneath us. A lesson emerged from all this. Sometimes what looks like indifference is really fear. Fear of judgment. Fear of letting down those we love. Fear of admitting we need help. I began to see that the courage to be honest, to ask for support, is just as important as the courage to achieve. In families as in life, it's not weakness to tell the truth. It's a necessary step toward healing. The silence in my family wasn't just about me. It was a silence that had settled over all of us, each in our own way. Armed with this new understanding, I found myself at a crossroads. I could keep my distance, resentful and hurt, or I could step closer, offering the help I wished they'd offered me. I started researching what it would take to save the house: legal documents, financial negotiations, and maybe a leap of faith. It wasn't about proving my worth anymore. It was about doing the right thing, not because I was expected to, but because I wanted to be part of something bigger than old wounds. That was the beginning of a new chapter 1, where I wasn't just reacting to the past, but actively shaping the future. I reached out to my mentor, Hank, for advice. He said sometimes the best way to rewrite your place in the family is to show up where you're needed, even if you have to create that place yourself. Those words stuck with me as I drafted emails, made calls, and slowly pieced together a plan. Little did I know, this act of stepping forward would soon shift the dynamics of my family in ways I never expected. Sometimes a house is just a house, but sometimes it becomes the stage where everything changes, where secrets come to light, and the bonds that seemed broken can finally begin to heal. The day I decided to intervene, the sky above Chicago was heavy with rain, but inside I felt a spark of clarity I hadn't known in years. It was time to act, not out of resentment, not to prove myself, but because I was tired of waiting for someone else to make the first move. I gathered the paperwork I'd collected about the beach house, the mortgage notices, overdue tax bills, all the uncomfortable facts my family had avoided for so long. For once, the role of the fixer didn't feel like a burden. It felt strangely like a choice, a way to take ownership not only of a problem, but of my place in the story. I approached the situation with the kind of quiet determination that had always defined me, but this time with a new sense of purpose. I researched foreclosure laws, reached out to a local real estate agent in Maine, and learned more about property auctions and short sales than I ever thought I'd need. It was a steep learning curve, but it also opened my eyes to just how many families across America go through similar struggles in silence. My agent told me stories about siblings fighting over childhood home's heirs, walking away from properties too burdened with debt, and the rare moments when someone stepped in and brought a family together around a shared solution. It made me realize that our pain wasn't unique. It was part of a much bigger pattern, one that played out in households from coast to coast. As I pieced together my plan, I found myself reflecting on a story my friend Olivia once shared. Her parents' bakery, a neighborhood staple for decades, was threatened with closure after a fire and a series of unpaid bills. Olivia had been living in another state building her own life when she heard the news. She flew home and, without telling her parents, used her savings to help pay the bills and organize repairs. For weeks, her parents didn't know the truth, but when they did, it was a mix of shocked gratitude and a little wounded pride. It wasn't just about saving the business, Olivia told me. It was about reminding us what we could do together if we dropped the act and admitted we needed help. Her story echoed in my mind as I prepared my own version of quiet intervention. I made the decision to purchase the beach house using my savings and a carefully structured loan. I kept things private, using a company name to make the offer not out of secrecy or spite, but because I knew how sensitive pride could be, how sometimes the hardest thing is to accept help from those you love. As the sale went through, I was flooded with a mix of emotions: relief that the house was safe, anxiety about what my family would say, and an unexpected swell of hope. Maybe by stepping into this new role, not just the fixer, but the bridge, I could start rewriting the rules of how we related to one another. The lesson I learned through this process was simple but powerful. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give to our families or to ourselves is the chance for a new beginning. We can't erase the old wounds or rewrite the past, but we can take concrete steps that open the door to different outcomes. By acting rather than waiting, we create space for healing, not through grand gestures, but through small, practical choices made with love and intention. It's not about rescuing anyone or seeking applause. It's about building a foundation for something better, even if it starts with a single brick. As the final paperwork was signed and the keys to the house officially became mine, I felt the old ache of exclusion shift just a little. I wasn't waiting on the sidelines anymore. I was a participant, a decision maker, and maybe for the first time, the author of my own family story. That knowledge didn't erase the loneliness, but it gave me strength. It made me realize that agency isn't about control. It's about showing up even when you're not sure how you'll be received. I knew the next step wouldn't be easy. My family still didn't know what I'd done, and there was a part of me that feared their reaction, anger, disbelief, maybe even more distance. But I also sensed the possibility for something new, a chance to invite them into honesty, to face our problems together rather than apart. As I stood by the window that night, watching city lights shimmer on the wet pavement below, I allowed myself to hope. Sometimes the most powerful changes start with a single quiet decision. And as the summer reunion approached, I realized that the house by the sea, once a symbol of all the ways I'd been left out, might soon become the place where everything changed. The first morning of the Greene family reunion dawned bright and blustery, the sea breeze whipping at the porch flag as if signaling change. I arrived at the beach house early, carrying a tray of coffee and a strange sense of calm. This time, there was no question about whether I belonged. I was the one opening the door. As my family's cars rolled up the gravel drive, I watched them step out, suitcases in tow, voices overlapping in familiar cadences. For a moment, it almost felt like any other summer. But when Carter, Sophie, and my parents saw me standing at the threshold, keys in hand, their faces shifted from confusion to disbelief. There's a delicate line between surprise and shock. My father's hand hovered at the doorknob. My mother's eyes darted to the windows as if searching for someone else to appear. Madison Carter finally managed his tone uncertain. What are you doing here? I met his gaze with steady warmth, inviting them all inside. Come in, I have something to show you. The living room, newly painted and brightened, echoed with the silence of expectation. I explained gently, without drama or pride, how I'd learned about the house's troubles, how I'd stepped in to keep it from being lost. The news rippled through the room, disbelief giving way to a complicated swirl of relief, embarrassment, and even gratitude. In that moment, I understood something I'd only glimpsed before: power in families is often unspoken, and changing the narrative requires more than just good intentions. For years, my family had unconsciously cast me as the helper, the one who picked up pieces quietly in the background. Now, by taking ownership, literally and figuratively, I was shifting that dynamic. It wasn't about revenge or making them feel guilty. It was about inviting them to see me finally as an equal. I remembered reading a story about a woman named June who, after years of being overlooked by her siblings, inherited her childhood home and chose to turn it into a gathering place for cousins and grandchildren. It's not about holding on to the past, June wrote. It's about building something new together. As my family absorbed what I'd done, the conversations became realer, deeper, sometimes more painful. Carter bristled at first, seeing my actions as an intrusion, but after a quiet walk along the beach, he admitted he'd been overwhelmed by his own struggles and ashamed to ask for help. Sophie, always the peacemaker, hugged me tightly and said she wished she'd noticed sooner how much I'd been carrying. My parents, too, seemed to soften their gratitude mingled with regret that it took a crisis for them to see my value. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation, old patterns don't vanish overnight, but for the first time, I felt the possibility of a new foundation. We sat on the porch that evening, the ocean humming in the background, and shared stories not just of old times, but of dreams and disappointments we'd never spoken aloud. The lesson in those days was clear: the courage to step into a new role can change everything, not just for yourself, but for those around you. In families, it's easy to let roles become fixed. Someone is always the star. Another is the caretaker, another the rebel or the quiet one. But real healing begins when someone has the courage to break that pattern, to act differently, and to invite others to do the same. That doesn't mean everyone will change immediately or even willingly, but it plants the seeds for something better. The process is messy, full of missteps and mixed feelings, but it's also deeply human. As the reunion unfolded, there were moments of tension, awkward laughter, and unexpected connection. We worked together to repair the old deck, cooked meals side by side, and rediscovered little joys, like the way my dad whistled while grilling, or how Sophie organized impromptu beach games. I watched as Carter loosened up playing with Sophie's kids and saw my mother smile as she set the table for everyone, no one missing. It was as if by stepping forward, I'd made space for all of us to try something new, to be seen in different lights. Yet even as the week wound down, I knew our work wasn't done. Changing family dynamics isn't a one-time fix. It's an ongoing practice, a series of choices made every day. I wondered what would happen after we all went back to our separate lives, whether this fragile new understanding would hold. As I sat on the porch one last time, the waves rolling in steady as breath, I realized I'd have to keep choosing to show up, not just for my family, but for myself. And so, as I packed up the house and watched the sun set over the water, I felt the weight of possibility. The next steps would require honesty, forgiveness, and a willingness to keep building brick by brick a family that reflected not just tradition, but genuine connection. There's a myth we're told about healing, that once a family works things out, everything is suddenly easy, that understanding will erase old scars in a single breath. But real life is messier, quieter, a dance of progress and setbacks where trust rebuilds itself slowly, moment by moment. After the reunion, as each of us returned to our daily routines, I noticed both hope and hesitation threading through our new connections. There were more text messages, little updates from Carter, photos of Sophie's kids with sandy smiles, but there were also awkward pauses and moments where old patterns tried to sneak back in. It was humbling to realize that while one summer could plant seeds of change, it couldn't undo decades of habit overnight. I saw this play out most clearly in the weeks that followed. Carter called one afternoon, his voice tighter than usual, asking for advice about a work challenge. At first I tensed. Was this just another fix-it moment or something different? As we talked, though, I realized he wasn't expecting me to solve everything. He wanted to be heard, not managed. That small difference felt huge. Meanwhile, Sophie invited me to join a video chat with her and the boys, letting me into the beautiful chaos of her everyday life. We laughed about things that not long ago would have made me feel left out. Slowly, I felt myself relaxing into these new rhythms, accepting that sometimes being part of a family means simply showing up, mess and all. The real test came the first time something didn't go as planned. My parents had promised to help organize a fall cleanup for the beach house, but when the date came, only my mother arrived, my father had forgotten, and Carter had a work emergency. Old disappointment flickered in my chest, but this time I let it pass without letting it take root. I spent the afternoon with my mom, raking leaves and sipping cider on the porch. She apologized for the others' absence, but instead of bottling up my feelings, I admitted I used to think being left out meant I wasn't important. Now I know it just means everyone's human and that I can ask for what I need. My mom squeezed my hand, and for the first time, I saw her wrestling with her own regrets, trying to do better. It was a gentle moment, unremarkable on the surface, but underneath something was changing. That afternoon, I was reminded of a conversation I'd once had with my mentor, Hank. He'd told me about rebuilding trust with his own adult children after years of estrangement. It wasn't one grand gesture, he'd said it was thousands of small ones. Texts, answered, invitations, accepted hard truths, spoken and forgiven. Healing isn't a finish line, it's a practice. The lesson stuck with me: progress is measured not by perfection, but by persistence. Families like people stumble and recover, and it's in the getting back up that real closeness is forged. I also began to notice how much effort it takes not to slip back into old roles. There were moments when I caught myself trying to fix things again, to smooth over every awkward silence or misunderstanding. But now I paused and chose differently. I let my family handle their own frustrations and let myself be imperfect too. When Carter called with good news about his job, I simply celebrated with him instead of offering advice. When Sophie vented about the challenges of motherhood, I listened rather than proposing solutions. Each time I resisted the urge to control, I gave both of us room to grow. It was uncomfortable at times, but also deeply freeing. As autumn settled over Maine and the days grew shorter, I found myself looking forward rather than back. The beach house became not just a relic of our past, but a shared project for our future, a place where everyone contributed, even if imperfectly. We started planning new traditions, winter holidays, spring cleanups, even the idea of inviting friends to join us next summer. The work of family was ongoing, but it finally felt mutual, a living, breathing thing we were all responsible for nurturing. And so, as the season shifted once more, I realized the greatest change wasn't in my family, but in myself. I was learning slowly, and sometimes clumsily, to let go of the old need for approval and to replace it with a quieter kind of confidence. I could belong not because I was indispensable, but simply because I was present. The road ahead would still have bumps and detours, but for the first time I felt ready to meet them not alone, but together. As winter approached, I found myself thinking more deeply about what it meant to build something new with my family. Not just a fresh coat of paint on the beach house, or a few better habits, but a different way of relating to each other rooted in honesty and choice. After years of defaulting to old roles, I wanted to know, could we create new traditions that truly belong to all of us? Not just the people who'd always held the reins. It was both exciting and daunting, this idea that family could be something we designed together instead of just inherited. One of my first steps was suggesting that we rotate who planned our gatherings. Instead of my mother organizing every detail, each of us, Carter, Sophie, and I, would take turns hosting, deciding on themes or activities that reflected what mattered most to us. At first, my siblings seemed hesitant, but slowly they warmed up to the idea. Sophie planned a spring picnic, all wildflowers and art supplies for the kids. Carter chose a hiking trip for the fall, and I volunteered to host a winter game night complete with board games, hot chocolate, and the world's coziest blankets. It was a small change, but it shifted the dynamic. For the first time, everyone had a voice, and no one was carrying the load alone. I saw how these changes rippled through our relationships. At Sophie's picnic, I watched her delight in organizing crafts for her boys and Carter's kids, while Carter, usually the planner, relaxed on a blanket, soaking in the sun. When I hosted the winter game night, I got to share my love of strategy games and storytelling, inviting everyone to play and laugh in ways we hadn't before. My mother admitted later that she felt lighter, freed from the pressure to make everything perfect. She could simply show up and enjoy her grandchildren without worrying if the soup was hot or the napkins matched. Even my father, who'd always kept to the sidelines, started bringing his favorite records to our gatherings, letting the music become part of our new rhythm. This evolution reminded me of something my friend Morgan once told me about her blended family. She and her wife had created family Sundays where everyone took turns picking activities, bowling, movie marathons, even trying new recipes from different cultures. The best part isn't what we do. Morgan explained, it's that we do it together and everyone feels heard. That insight stuck with me. Healthy families aren't born, they're built decision by decision, year after year. They make room for each member's quirks and dreams, and they honor both the old traditions and the new ones forged along the way. A lesson emerged from all of this: belonging isn't about fitting into someone else's mold. It's about being able to shape the experience, to leave your mark, and to trust that you'll be welcomed for who you truly are. When families invite participation instead of just expecting compliance, they create the conditions for genuine connection. I learned that giving up control doesn't mean losing significance. Instead, it makes space for others to show up and surprise you with their creativity, their perspective, and their care. The changes weren't always smooth, and we sometimes stumbled. Carter forgot to order enough food for his hiking trip, leading to a makeshift lunch of granola bars and shared laughs. Sophie's picnic got rained out, so we ended up picnicking on the living room floor. But these hiccups became memories, the kind that draw people closer precisely because they're imperfect. Through it all, I felt myself growing softer, less attached to outcomes, and more grateful for the process itself. As another year came to a close, I stood at the window of the beach house watching snowflakes swirl outside. The rooms were full of laughter and the smell of cinnamon, and for the first time in years, I felt not just present, but fully at home. There would always be challenges ahead: schedules to juggle, feelings to navigate, old wounds that sometimes ached in unexpected ways. But we were finally learning to face them as a team, each person bringing something valuable to the table. Looking back, I realized how far we'd come from that first uncertain reunion. By daring to try new ways of being together, we'd discovered that family could be a source of joy instead of just obligation. And as I listened to the soft hum of conversation drifting through the house, I wondered what else was possible if we kept choosing day after day to build something real together. There is a special kind of peace that settles in when you realize you no longer have to earn your place at the table. For so many years, I believed that belonging was something fragile, a reward that could be revoked if I failed to play my part. But now, as my family and I experimented with new traditions and honest conversations, I found myself moving through gatherings with a different sense of ease. I could speak my mind, say no when I needed to, or simply show up as myself, imperfections and all. There was freedom in knowing that love was not a prize to be won, but a language to be spoken and practiced again and again. As winter turned to spring, Carter suggested we try something entirely new: a family project at the beach house. Instead of dividing tasks in the old way, Mom making lists, me quietly fixing what was broken, each of us would pitch an idea for improving the house or grounds, and we'd vote together on which to pursue. Sophie wanted to plant a butterfly garden, Carter lobbied for a fire pit, and I suggested creating a cozy library nook filled with everyone's favorite childhood books. The final project became a blend of all three: a winding garden path leading to a circle of stones and a sunny corner lined with bookshelves. Working side by side, I saw my family in new ways. Carter patient and methodical with the stonework, Sophie teaching her kids the names of each plant, my parents reading aloud to the grandchildren as we hammered shelves into place. The change wasn't just in the house, but in us. I remembered a story my friend Simone once shared about her family's journey after a difficult estrangement. We couldn't go back to what we were before she told me, so we built something new from what was left. Now every year we write letters to each other and tuck them into a memory box for the next reunion. It's our way of saying we're still here, still trying. Inspired by this, our family began leaving notes in the new library nook, messages of gratitude, favorite memories, even apologies for old hurts. Reading those notes each visit, I felt something soften and expand, a quiet trust that grew stronger over time. It struck me that most of what holds families together isn't grand gestures or dramatic apologies, but small acts of showing up, tending a garden together, sharing a meal, building a place to gather. In those quiet moments, love weaves itself into the ordinary, becoming both anchor and invitation. The lesson I realized is that belonging is a daily practice. It's in asking for help without shame, in giving space for others to change, and in trusting that you are enough exactly as you are. When you make room for everyone's voice, including your own, you create a home, not just of walls and windows, but of welcome. I carried these truths with me as my own life began to shift again. At work, a new opportunity arose, a chance to lead a project in another city, something I'd once dreamed about, but felt afraid to pursue, fearing it would pull me even farther from my family. This time, though, I felt anchored in a way I never had before. When I told my family about the offer, they cheered for me, promising to visit and help me settle in. My mother surprised me with a scrapbook of family recipes, and Carter offered to drive cross-country with me. For the first time, distance didn't feel like exile. It felt like possibility. As I packed up my apartment, sorting through old photos and keepsakes, I thought about the journey we'd all taken, not just from exclusion to inclusion, but from silence to connection. I knew there would be moments when old habits returned, or when miles made things harder. But I also knew that the work we'd done choosing each other again and again would carry us through whatever came next. The next chapter of my life was about to begin, and this time I wasn't running from my past. I was walking forward with the lessons, the memories, and the family I'd helped reshape, one honest conversation, one new tradition, one imperfect but beautiful step at a time. Sometimes the true measure of change is how gently you can let go. As I began my new chapter in a city hundreds of miles from the familiar Maine shore, I realized that the beach house and all it had come to symbolize would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. Each time I returned for a visit, the laughter felt a little deeper, the silences less heavy, and the memories richer for all they'd survived. Even as I built a life beyond my family's orbit, I carried their stories and my own newfound strength with equal gratitude. The distance, rather than thinning our bonds, made the threads between us more deliberate, woven with intention and choice. One spring, as I unpacked boxes in my new apartment, I found the envelope of Library Nook, notes my family had given me as a farewell gift. I sat on my new windowsill, sunlight filtering through, and read the scrawled messages. Thank yous, apologies, shared jokes, even a drawing from Sophie's youngest that simply said, "You are loved." Tears pricked my eyes, not from regret, but from recognition. I thought about how just a few years ago, I would have doubted these words, wondering if I truly belonged, or if it was all too fragile. Now I could trust that the work we'd done as a family, the honest talks, the messy attempts at new traditions, the willingness to listen and forgive, had created a foundation that would last even as our lives continued to shift. I was reminded of a story I once heard at a community storytelling night about a man named Ben, who after years of estrangement from his siblings, helped organize a family reunion in the park where they'd played as kids. We spent more time awkward than happy, at first, Ben admitted, but it was worth it. Just to remember that family is a choice we keep making. His story stayed with me because it echoed the truth I'd discovered: there is no perfect ending in family, only the ongoing, imperfect work of choosing each other and ourselves over and over again. The greatest lesson, perhaps, is this: forgiveness and belonging are not destinations. They're the daily practice of kindness, the willingness to show up even after mistakes, and the courage to rewrite roles that no longer fit. Families are always works in progress, shaped not just by history, but by the choices we make now. How we listen, how we include, how we celebrate and mourn together. I saw this when my parents visited me for the first time in my new city, not as reluctant guests, but as fellow travelers eager to see the world through my eyes. We wandered through parks and museums, cooked dinner in my tiny kitchen, and made new memories that belonged only to us. As time went on, my sense of self deepened. I built new friendships, explored unfamiliar neighborhoods, and took risks I might once have avoided, out of fear of not having anyone to catch me if I fell. But my family, once a source of pain and longing, had become a steady, supportive presence, sometimes near, sometimes far, always real. We no longer needed grand gestures or endless explanations. A simple check-in call, a postcard, or a family recipe emailed at midnight was enough to remind us that love does not disappear even as it changes form. If I could offer one final lesson from this journey, it would be that your story, like mine, is never truly finished. There will be days when old insecurities whisper, when family wounds reopen, or when you wonder if you're asking too much of those you love. On those days, remember you are not alone. You have the right to belong, to be seen, and to shape your own traditions no matter where you began. The hardest step is often the first one: the choice to believe in your own worth and to risk inviting others to see it too. As I look back on the winding path that brought me here, I'm filled with gratitude for every imperfect moment, every difficult conversation, every chance to try again. I hope that wherever you are on your own journey, you know that change is possible, that it's never too late to claim your place at the table, to start new traditions, or to reach out one more time for connection. Thank you for walking this path with me. If this story resonated with you, I hope you'll share it or simply reach out to someone you love. Because sometimes all it takes is one honest voice, one act of courage to begin building the family and the future you deserve. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt overlooked or longed for a fresh start in your own family, I invite you to take one small step today. Share your story in the comments below, or let us know how you found your way back to connection, even in unexpected ways. Maybe send a message to someone you miss, or start a new tradition, however small, with people you care about. If you found hope or inspiration here, please like this video, subscribe for more true stories of healing and renewal, and share it with someone who might need a gentle reminder that change is possible. Every voice and every story matters, including yours. Together, we can create a community where everyone feels seen and no one has to claim their seat alone. Thank you for being here. I can't wait to hear your story.